I have all of the documentation up on GitHub repository for us to work off of. And based on the outline, again, you guys can decide whether or not you want to catch the other session. You can even stay here for a little bit and leave. I'm not offended at all. Feel free to let me know if I need to be talking louder. I'm not much to be projecting, so I'm relying on the mic for the most part. So first off, you can open your browsers just to github.com/mwbrooks/PhoneGap-day-workshop-beginner. Yeah, it's pretty natural. It's just a long title. And just click on the wiki button after that, and you'll be shot to the exact same place that I'm at. Like I said, this is the PhoneGap Essentials beginner training, so I'm assuming you've never used PhoneGap, you've heard of PhoneGap, maybe you've done some extremely simple work with PhoneGap, but we're just going to go through the tools available. By the end of the session, you'll have created and ran multiple projects in multiple different ways with our tools. So it's fairly easy. No SDKs required. So if you don't have Xcode or the Android SDK installed, don't worry about it. We don't need them, not for this session. The next two sessions afterwards will require it, though. Most people are on the site. Thumbs up. We're good? Everyone looks good. You can always look at your neighbor, I guess, if you didn't catch the URL. So the good news is that this is fully documented. If you lose track, you fall behind, you can just follow the steps, and we'll have a few people patrolling around that can always help you out. And likewise, if it's painful how slow I'm going, you can just power ahead. And again, if you think you know this content, you can always just copy the URL, leave, and review it later. This is a GitHub wiki, so it's pretty awesome. If you've never done any open source work today, you could do it. You can click the edit button at the top, make changes. So if you find spelling mistakes that I have, or you find a step that I missed, edit it, add it in. It's your first open source contribution, so that's pretty awesome, I think. If you're too scared or intimidated to add any content, there's an issues tab on the right-hand side. You can submit an issue. I can fix it up later on. And you can also look at the core of the repository just to see a sample app. And this sample app is actually the final app that people will be building in the next two workshops. So we're just going to skip ahead and use what they've already built, which is pretty good. Just going over the outline, first off is a bit of talking. I'm just going to describe what a hybrid app is. I think it's fundamental to really knowing why you would choose to use PhoneGap over anything else. Describe PhoneGap, describe Cordova. If you've heard PhoneGap, there's a good chance you've heard Cordova, and there's some confusion around that, so I'll try to address that. Go over what's involved in the PhoneGap SDK or framework, however you want to think of it, and after that, we're going to install the PhoneGap CLI. We're going to install the PhoneGap Developer App on your phone, build an app, preview it on that prototyping app. We're then going to use the PhoneGap Desktop tool, which is a visual version of the CLI, to do the same thing. Show you PhoneGap Build as well and why you might want to be using that. And if there's time, we can dive into just a little bit on extending your project with PhoneGap plugins, extending your project with PhoneGap hooks, debugging your app. And we're also creating a new product called PhoneGap Enterprise. So this one's up for grabs. I can kind of gauge from people in the audience, I guess, whether or not you're even interested in this. But if you happen to show some interest, I can take some time and show you that kind of thing as well. We also have one of the core developers here who's working on it, so he would be happy to demo it as well. All right, a little bit about myself. My name is Michael Brooks. You can find me on Twitter at MWBrooks. I live in Vancouver, Canada. Before working at Adobe, I worked at a company called Nitobi, and Nitobi created PhoneGap in 2008. I joined the company in 2010, I guess. I've done a lot of the various work. I did the initial BlackBerry implementation, a few of the other BlackBerry implementations. I've contributed to the iOS project, the Android project. I started the docs, so if you hate the documentation, you can blame me. but at the same time, we haven't actually done a lot since it was originally created. Started the Cordova CLI, started the PhoneGap CLI, working on the PhoneGap Developer App that you'll be using. Done a little bit of work in the PhoneGap Enterprise as well. So all of this I've listed as open source as well, which is pretty incredible. I've also a core contributor to Apache Cordova since we donated it to Apache. So I'm a good guy, I guess, to be asking questions and venting to if you find problems. I'm cool with that. All right, let's get into it. So I think the beginning is, what is a hybrid application? It's important to understand what hybrid apps are when you're dealing with PhoneGap. And the best way to summarize is that hybrid apps are just a fusion of native apps and web apps. And at that point, you have to ask yourself, what are native apps and what are web apps? And if you're more knowledgeable around the mobile landscape right now, you'll realize that the word native and hybrid are actually starting to even blur in many ways. But we'll get into that in a bit. Native apps are applications that we know best. They're typically written with the programming language recommended by the platform. They're written with the platform's recommended tools, and they're typically designed to match that platform's design recommendations. And so they perform very well. If you're writing an iOS app, you would be downloading Xcode as the SDK, and you'd be using Objective-C as the programming language, and you would be following Apple's guidelines quite strictly to create an application, and that'll produce a very good application. If you're wanting to do Android development, you would be using Eclipse as your SDK, and you would be using their variant of Java to do the actual implementation. And again, you would compile that into an application. And Windows Phone, likewise, like most of the Windows environments, you're going to be using Visual Studio to create your application, and you'll be using .NET as the programming language, and again, you'll compile it, and it'll end up looking like most of the other applications. And this is the traditional technique, and we've done this with Windows development, with Mac development, and you can do it again on mobile platforms, and it's the traditional way to do it. And there are some advantages to that. Actually, just as a brief thing, this little picture right here is just Tweetbot on the iPhone, which is just a fantastic native application for Twitter. So there are some advantages to native apps. There's no denying that. They're incredibly fast. They've been compiled for that phone or that operating system. They've been written with the recommended tools, and they tend to perform very, very well. They also tend to match the UX and the design that you would expect of a traditional application. Buttons and scrolling and things like that will all perform the way you expect. And so they do have some very high advantages. But they also have a few disadvantages, and the big one is the fact that you actually have to learn that specific language just to write for that one specific device. And I think if you're writing one application for one platform, native is a very wise choice. But that's kind of where it ends, and this is where web applications start to really take their strength. Web applications are written with traditional web tech, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Almost every developer right now knows that stuff. If you're a company looking to hire people, they're a dime a dozen, they're everywhere. So it's easy to find developers for that kind of thing. The web landscape is moving incredibly fast. Browsers are getting better and better every year, and they can perform and deliver very rich experiences. Their main advantage, there's no denying, is that they work everywhere. People often forget that you can make a website and go to it on a Mac, go to it on a Windows box, go to it on a Linux box, and it pretty much looks the same. You can open that exact same website on a phone, and it usually looks the same. And that's a massive, massive advantage. Instead of devoting all this time trying to program an application for one platform, you can put that same time and hit endless platforms, even platforms that you never thought of. When the Opera browser gets updated or when the Firefox phone takes off, your website will be accessible to people using it, and that's really good. Disadvantages are also there, certainly. they don't perform nearly as well as native apps. You never expect a website to ever perform as well as a native application. They're not nearly as feature-rich. Web applications, if you go and open up your browser, you're typically not expecting to use the camera, have it access your file systems, send you push notifications, offering these deeper, rich experiences you would expect from a native app, not a web app. And the last one is that they're typically hosted. You access web applications by opening your browser. It's a window into all of the web, and then you navigate to that exact address. And this is where hybrid apps come in. Hybrid apps are a fusion of those two worlds, and they can be anywhere along that scale. PhoneGap has chosen a specific place of where hybrid apps are, but we do allow people to extend or enrich their app however they want. So at the core, hybrid apps are native apps. Every hybrid app is a native project. So if you compile a PhoneGap app for Android, you're actually compiling a PhoneGap native project. It's actually just a full screen browser though, and so the browser itself is compiled as the app, but you bundle your web application into the app, and the browser will actually just load that web application locally on the phone. And so you're getting the best of both worlds in many ways, where you can distribute the app to stores, you can charge money for it, you do have a performance gain because there's no latency of the web involved. You can also extend that browser however you wish. So if you want a toolbar at the top and a button at the bottom, and then the browser in the middle, you're welcome to do that. If you want to have half of your application to be native components, and when they click on a certain area, you would actually render a hybrid app, which is just the web browser, you can do that. And many applications actually do that. Twitter is one of them. Instagram, if you go under their follower and news feed, that's actually just a web view, even though the main app is actually the native component. But at the end, hybrid apps are also web applications. You actually write the majority of your application in web tech, and that web tech is portable. So if we create containers as hybrid apps for Android, for iOS, and for Windows Phone, and they're just generic containers that have a full screen browser, you can then write a web application that would run locally on the phone, bundle it into each of those three, and get the same experience. So it can be very advantageous. There are other spectrums to that, though. Some people will actually overlay native controls over top of their web view, or shrink the web view to be just a very small component. And so it's your choice where you want to sit in that world. PhoneGap, by default, assumes that you want a full screen web browser as your application. Any questions? Does that make sense? We can kind of move at whatever pace you guys want, so feel free to bring up questions at all. So I think it's a very fundamental part to take away from this lecture. So getting into that, the next logical question is, like, what is PhoneGap? And PhoneGap at the heart is a hybrid application. The only catch is that it's a hybrid application on steroids, really. And I say that because with PhoneGap, we actually combined JavaScript functions to native functions, and we do this through a plugin interface. And so as a developer, you can write a chunk of native code, maybe in Objective-C, and then you combine an Objective-C function to a JavaScript function. And now you've got a gateway into the native layer. And so your hybrid app can start to do a lot of interesting things. You can begin to access the file system from your browser. So when you're writing code, you can always think of it in the terms of JavaScript. But by installing a file plugin, it can translate it to iOS, to Android, to Windows Phone. You can access push notifications. You can do virtually anything you want, and it's all through JavaScript functions or having messages piped into the browser, so you could trigger events and that kind of thing. And that really becomes extremely powerful. With just that principle, you can almost do anything you want as a plugin. Some examples that I would go with are geolocation. Every mobile browser has geolocation today, but when we started out in 2008, many of them didn't, especially BlackBerry, never had them. And so we were able to use a native geolocation implementation on BlackBerry, offer the exact same geolocation interface that's common on all other browsers, but not touch iPhone and Android, which already had geolocation. So now we could actually create a common ground on all three platforms. We were one of the first to implement the accelerometer as an interface. It was a spec by the web standards group W3C, and we took that spec and we offered a JavaScript interface that they defined, and then we implemented the native parts behind the scenes. And the web standards body loved it. They were able to see their draft that they had talked about forever in their hands running as an actual application. They were able to see some of the faults and some of the benefits. And Google was one of the very first guys to adopt it for their Android, and they really drove that standard after that. File is one that's coming up very popular now. Push notifications are something that we don't see as a standard yet, but you can access through PhoneGap as a plugin if you want, and virtually anything else you can dream up. Now when it comes to PhoneGap, I think sometimes knowing about the history of it is, for one, it's just interesting to know, but I think it also helps you understand the philosophy behind the project and why we've made some of the decisions that we have. PhoneGap was born from a company called Nitobi, and we were just a small 20-man consultancy in Vancouver. Not a startup, really. The company had been around since 1998, and the owners really just loved to snowboard, to ski, to mountain bike, and they just wanted a company where they could live that kind of life, and they would hire employees who really valued doing their own thing on the time while also doing quality work. And the company always specialized in the web, and they always enjoyed open source, even though open source wasn't that popular in the late 90s. And as a consultancy, they were just working largely on desktop web applications until the iPhone took off. And they started getting clients who wanted to do Palm OS applications or iPhone applications or BlackBerry applications. And our team started learning all of these native languages, but we're web developers at the beginning. And while it's not difficult to learn a new language, it's time consuming. And as a consultancy, you want to move fast. You need to bring in money to be able to eat the next month. And so we just thought it was insane that we were creating the exact same applications. Clients would want us to have the same app on 2 devices, and it would take us 6 months or 3 months to make the same app twice. It was boring to learn Java and then relearn a specific version of .NET or even Palm OS's implementation and make the exact same app. And we sat back and we said, well, the web solved this. We used to be able to make websites and everybody was able to access it. So why are we moving away from that? And when iPhone came out, Steve Jobs had said that the original iPhone SDK would be purely through the web. And later on, developers didn't enjoy that, and so they ended up offering a native implementation of their SDK. But we thought he was onto something at that point, and so 2 of our team members prototyped on iPhone, can we actually create a native application that's really just a web application? And in a weekend, they came up with the iPhone prototype, and another guy came up with the Android prototype, and another person came up with the Palm OS prototype, and another person came up with the BlackBerry one. And now we had a suite of hybrid applications where we could just write a web app, dump it into these shells, compile it, and give it to our clients. And so that's what we started doing. But then our clients quickly wanted to take photos, access geolocation. Geolocation was probably the very first thing that people wanted. And we realized that this was a limitation, but we could actually overcome it through just creative hacks, mostly, of finding ways to invoke JavaScript functions and have the native side learn about it. We did literally anything we could, monitoring cookies, monitoring the status bar, hijacking the prompt, running a local web server on the phone and talking back and forth. We've done a lot of different hacks to make it work, but it doesn't matter because you don't call those JavaScript functions very often. Performance doesn't have to be in the milliseconds. Once you invoke the function, you get the response, you're okay. And today, everything performs quite quick. Back then, we would pull a cookie every second even, and it tended to be quite fine. Sorry, did someone say something there? Okay. Yeah, and so we ended up working on client apps doing this, and the point is that PhoneGap started being driven by practical work, which I think every open source project should be driven by. We had open sourced it right from the very beginning, and ever so slowly we started to get contributions. And the big moment was when the IBM innovation team that previously worked on projects like PHP and Apache had came by and said, we're really interested in this project. And they joined us. So there's a sketchy group of 20 guys in Vancouver who are not professional at all. And then these IBM professionals who have worked on all of these popular open source projects. And so it was a big moment for us, at least, and it was a big moment for them to sign their contributor rights over to sketchy Nitobi in Vancouver, Canada. But they did. And I think that was a big turning point for the project. After that, we started getting quite a few big contributors. BlackBerry became one of our major contributors. We have code sitting inside of BlackBerry's operating system. We have code sitting inside of the Windows Phone as well. And over time, it got more and more popular. We continued with client work until Adobe came along and saw promise in the product, wanted to acquire the company. And while we were never looking to have an acquisition, it seemed like the right opportunity, the right decision. So we ended up being acquired by Adobe. But at that time, there was one catch. PhoneGap had been copyrighted to Nitobi, which meant that copyright would transfer to Adobe. And also, all the contributor rights have been signed to Nitobi. And most of these companies were not comfortable contributing to a project under Adobe. In one department inside the other company would be competing. So what we ended up doing was donating PhoneGap to an open source foundation that would ensure that PhoneGap always moved in the direction that the contributors wanted. No single company could take advantage of that project and drive it in the wrong direction. And we decided at the time that Apache was the right one, which is actually, it's quite an honorable moment for us to actually have a project accepted by the Apache Foundation. But sure enough, we donated to Apache. Now, the catch is that Apache didn't want the name PhoneGap. For years, we had been going through a passive lawsuit with the Gap, like the clothing company. They didn't like the fact that we were called PhoneGap, and even worse, we had bolded the word Gap, and we sold, well, we didn't sell, but we gave away clothing with the word PhoneGap on it. And so it was just, it seemed to be this part-time hobby of one of the lawyers at Gap. He would just once in a while ping sketchy Nitobi and tell us to stop doing it, and we would mostly just ignore him. And because we were so small, he just didn't care. But the moment we were acquired by Adobe, that was big. Now it means that the Gap can take a lawsuit against Adobe. And Apache had no interest at all in taking on that legal burden. And so they just asked us to rename the project, and fair enough. So we ended up donating it as Apache Cordova at the time. I can describe later why we chose the word Cordova and how we did the donation, but the entire project was donated to Apache as Apache Cordova. We moved over to Adobe, and now we were looking at ways to add value to Apache Cordova as PhoneGap. So that's it's like the long story of how we've kind of came here. Our motto has always been free as in beer since 2008, and I think we stick by that. PhoneGap is entirely open source, and Apache Cordova is entirely open source, and it's something that we believe strongly in. Any questions? Makes sense? Cool. Okay. Yeah, so Cordova. Cordova is this confusing thing. We had good intentions. We had really good intentions when we donated it, so what we actually did was we donated everything. The entire code base of PhoneGap, every word PhoneGap was still in there. We just pushed it right into an Apache repo, and I don't think Adobe at the time was super stoked that we had taken this popular project and gave the whole thing away to Apache, but that's what we did. And suddenly PhoneGap just overnight became Cordova, and there's some major confusion there, but our intention is that Cordova is the engine that powers PhoneGap. In the same way that WebKit is the browser engine that powers Safari and previously powered Chrome, or if you're a gamer, the Unreal Engine is the engine that powers many of the popular games. And so for us, Cordova is the engine that powers PhoneGap. And more important than that, since donating to Apache, we've had a huge number of contributors join the project. Google is one of our biggest, but Microsoft has also signed to help contribute. And they're all creating products, or they're integrating Cordova into their existing products. So today you can actually download Visual Studio and create a Cordova project, and that's absolutely incredible. It's bundled in there. Google is rebranding Cordova to work with their Chrome packaged apps, and there'll be a workshop on that here today. A number of companies have taken Cordova and made enterprise or business offerings for it, and that's fantastic because there's also PhoneGap in there, and we don't view any of these products as competitors. We're just encouraging the hybrid app ecosystem. Everybody under the hood is running a Cordova project, and with a little bit of effort, you can probably compile that exact same project on a different platform. So I think it's incredibly powerful. It's a great opportunity to work by. Now, the big catch is that Apache is also limited. They're a nonprofit organization with no central entity for the most part. So to publish an app in an app store is a nightmare for them. To even make swag, stickers, t-shirts, not going to happen. Never going to do hosted web services, because who's going to front the bill? Who's going to manage that kind of thing? And so these are so many opportunities for PhoneGap to work with, where we can take Cordova, we can stay 100% aligned with Cordova, which is one of our main focuses, that you should always be able to take a Cordova vanilla project and have it work with PhoneGap. So there's no buy-in, no tie-in to PhoneGap at all. But then we can actually build value on top of that. We can start hosting good services. We can start making opinionated recommendations on what kind of frameworks you should be using. We can tie into those frameworks tightly. And so we can actually start to offer real solid value to developers while keeping the engine generic under the hood. I've went through most of the history of Cordova already, but one thing that people often ask is the name Cordova and why it's named that. The original Nitobe office is just on the corner of Cordova Street and Abbott Street. So we had a whole day of brainstorming, and naming seems to be one of the hardest problems in computer science. We can't figure it out at all. For a moment, we actually called Cordova Callback, and it was the official name. If you go up to the Cordova issue tracker, Jira has CB dash and the issue number, and the reason it says CB is because we called our project Callback. Now, can you imagine trying to search for Callback as a web JavaScript project on Google? It was insane. So anyways, we quickly realized that was the worst name ever, and we renamed it to Cordova. We had a whole board full of random names, famous people's last names, countries, all these kind of things. And in the end, Brian LaRue was like, screw it. Brian lives on Cordova Street as well, and our office was on Cordova Street, so he just suggested Cordova, and our team was so beaten down from thinking of names that we took it. But since then, we've actually been naming a lot of our projects after street names in Vancouver, and I'm waiting for someone to name the project Abbott, A-B-B-O-T. It'd be like a super awesome continuous integration server or build bot or something like that. Yeah, I think that's really the gist of a Cordova right there. Cool. So that's really like the talking part. That's the boring part of this whole presentation. That was about 30 minutes. So now we have about an hour to just really do hands-on work. I think that's good. So basically going over the PhoneGap framework here, I think of the PhoneGap project as composed of 5 pieces, and we're adding more pieces, and we're starting to actually tie all of these pieces together quite strongly. But the 5 pieces that I think of today are your project, which is a Cordova project at its heart, and it's really just a set of files. That's it. We have the PhoneGap command line tool, or PhoneGap CLI, and this is today the main way to use PhoneGap. You'll install the CLI, and then you can start to interact with projects. We have a pre-release that I just wanted to show you guys, but we're like, it's on 0010 or something. It's super low, but I figured you guys should check it out and we can get some feedback on it, but it's a desktop version. So the command line isn't for everyone. People are sometimes daunted by it, or especially Windows users, it's just truly awkward to work on the command line. So a good desktop tool that has some visual buttons to click is something that we've been looking into offering. We have the PhoneGap Developer App, which is an on-device prototyping app that will solve a lot of headaches for you guys. If you happen to go into the later sessions, you'll be wishing you could use the PhoneGap Developer App more. And then PhoneGap Build is a compiler in the cloud. It's a service that we created back with Nitobi, and we're still running it with Adobe. It's got an insane number of users with it. So we'll go through that guy too. So let's just jump into the project format. You don't have to know this project format perfectly. We're actually only going to really dive into one folder here, but a PhoneGap project is a Cordova project. So if you know one, you know the other. I think that's probably good enough to kind of go with the introduction. So when it comes to the actual file system, I'm just going to zoom in right here. So imagine that we create a project called My App. If you create that project on the command line, it's going to be called My-App, which is simply your project name. Inside there, you're going to get a couple folders. Let's ignore the first couple and focus on the www folder. This is where your web assets go. You should be able to take that www folder and pretty much upload it to any website and point your browser at it, and there's a good chance that it'll work. And the philosophy of PhoneGap is that we try to stay aligned as much as possible with the standards bodies, drafts that are coming out. When drafts get adopted, we'll try to update our APIs. And so slowly, as the standards bodies come up with drafts and browsers implement them, you can actually take your www directory, dump it up on a website, and more often than not, you can navigate to it with a mobile browser, and it'll work. Things that used to require the native code now can just work out of the browser. Today, again, and because we're always staying in the draft phase, it's not going to happen, but apps that are 3 years old now have a much higher chance of just working on the web. Platforms is the complete opposite side. Inside platforms, you'll have a folder called iOS, or a folder called Android, or a folder called Windows Phone, and these are native projects, straight up. Everything in there is native. And inside of those native projects, you'll actually find a www folder, and it's a link or a copy of this www folder. And when you compile that native project and you run it, it'll open up a full-screen browser, and it'll point itself to the index.html in the www folder, and that is your app. Aside from that, you could actually just take those native projects, open them up in Visual Studio or Xcode and work with them. So if your team has one guy who's quite good with native code and the rest just want to stick in the web, you can kind of work with either side. Plugins sit right in the middle. Plugins are specific things such as the geolocation accelerometer file. And they're going to be combinations of native and web. A good plugin will probably have one JavaScript file, which is the JavaScript interface, and then a ton of native files, which is the native implementation. And that JavaScript file will simply just call into the bridge to hit the native code and come back. We initially built PhoneGap with all of the plugins hard-coded in, and just over the years we've pulled them all out. And pulling them out was a smart move because it's made people implement their own third-party plugins very easily. .Cordova is more or less deprecated. You can ignore it for the most part, but it's a Cordova configuration directory. You'll find a config.json inside there, and it uses it to store temporary files once in a while, but you just need that folder right in there, and I think probably in the next year or so we'll just see it entirely vanish. And hooks is kind of like, you can think of it as tasks if you're familiar with Grunt or maybe Make or something like that. You can basically, it's inspired by Git hooks, and you can tie into almost any command that the command line tool uses. So if you run PhoneGap Build Android, there is a before build and after build hook, and you can dump any executable script into there, that directory, and those hooks will be fired before the build or after the build. And it can be very powerful, especially if for example, for the longest while, we never supported defining icons and splash screens. You actually had to go into the native project and just dump the proper icons and splash screens in there. And although we took a long time to decide on a standard for that, a lot of users just created their hooks called install icon. And that little hook would just parse our configuration file. They define their own format, and they could install their icons programmatically. So you can often extend Cordova in ways that we just never see just by playing around with the hooks. I go into quite a bit of detail. You can read through if you want what each of these folders do, but I think my description does a decent job. The only file that I wasn't able to cover through that is inside the WW, there's a config.xml. And this is really your manifest file for a PhoneGap project. So inside this file, you can define your application name, which would be shown as the icon and shown in the App Store, your application description, your team name. You can define security, access, and permissions around that. You can even, if you don't like index.html as your entry point, you can set it as, I'm cool.html, whatever. We chose config.xml because there was a standard around it, actually. For the longest while, the plan was actually most rich web apps should define a config.xml next to the index.html. And then they could actually start to define permissions around that. That standard's really fallen off, and now we're wondering whether or not we can move on. JSON files would sure be nice compared to XML, so that might be a direction that Cordova moves in the future, but for today, you'll just have to write a config.xml. Now the next tool is the PhoneGap CLI, and this has simplified and complicated PhoneGap in both regards. The CLI will do everything for you if you want it to. You can generate a project, you can build a native Android project, you can run that Android project on a simulator and it'll pop up the simulator. You can push that project onto a device and it'll do that for you as well. It'll install plugins for you and uninstall plugins. It'll even tie into PhoneGap Build. So you can log in with your PhoneGap Build credentials, and if you don't have a local SDK installed, it can fire it up to PhoneGap Build instead, which is nice sometimes if you have a designer on your team who doesn't want to configure their system, but the developer wants to get more detailed. The downside is that it's complicated because many people just don't like using the CLI. It can be intimidating. So we're going to dive into it a little bit, but with the CLI, you can actually end up tying it into your existing build chain as well. So most web apps out there tend to have a grunt file, gulp file, make file, rake file, something like that. And you can simply shell out to the PhoneGap CLI to do one of your many tasks if you want to minify your JavaScript and then just build out the app. Now the alternative, like I said, to the PhoneGap CLI is a PhoneGap desktop app, which is something that we're slowly pushing out, and I'm looking forward to any feedback that you guys have. It has a very small feature set, but it's actually an installable app. The screenshot that I have here, funny enough, is showing the debugging bar at the top, so you get to see how we've written it. This installable app, it works on Windows and Mac, is actually a hybrid app as well. It's just an HTML app at its heart. It's running Node under the hood, so rather than bridging into the native side being Objective-C, we treat Node as that native side. And so we can go in through the JavaScript interface of Node.js and then do anything else that we want. So it's pretty cool. Now the PhoneGap Developer App is, I truly think, the saving grace for many people, at least when you're getting up and running. Now, if you go into the later sessions, you're going to find that it's really hard to install an app on a device. If you have an Android phone, it's pretty easy, thankfully. If you have a Windows phone, you're going to have to download and unlock it and sign up for an MSDN account. If you have an iPhone, you're going to have to shell out $100 to Apple and deal with provisioning. It's a bit of a nightmare until you get the hang of it. So we got around this by creating a on-device prototyping app that you can download from the app stores. And you can immediately preview an app that you have on your computer on your phone without any of the other steps involved. So it's simplified development in many ways, and it's still growing quite a bit in functionality. And lastly, PhoneGap Build, which is best thought of as just a compiler in a cloud. And yeah, you don't have to have any SDKs installed in your system. Instead, you can take your www folder that you've created, upload it to PhoneGap Build, and PhoneGap Build will spit out the debug or production-ready binaries for your application, which is pretty cool as well. We're actually thinking about having it spit out customized versions of the PhoneGap Developer App as well, if you happen to want special plugins or anything like that. So the basic workflow of this workshop is that we're going to install the PhoneGap CLI. We're going to create a project. We're going to pair it with the PhoneGap Developer App so you can see it in action. You can edit it, play with the project if you want. Afterwards, I went ahead and stole Holly's final project that the workshop next or after this will be making. And we can clone that one down. We can then serve that to the app. So you get to see a richer application. We'll then take the exact same project and use the desktop app rather than the CLI, and you get a feel for how portable the tools are. You're welcome to use the CLI, and your friend is welcome to use the desktop app. So it's quite nice. And after that, we'll take the exact same project and we'll throw it up on PhoneGap Build, and Build will churn out actual binaries. And if you have an Android phone, you can install that app. If you're an advanced iPhone user, you can install that app. And if you're a Windows user, I have some documentation on how to get up and running with that stuff. Cool. So break out your computers. This is where we're going to start actually doing some work. Feel free. Again, I'm trying to keep this casual. I don't want to move faster than the average pace of everyone. So if you feel like you have a question, there's a good chance someone else has a question. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
But so one thing that I'm curious about is your take on how to make sure that the app is going to make it through the acceptance process in Apple.
Yeah. Yeah. It's you know, Apple's a lot. Oh yeah, totally. I'll repeat the question. He's asking whether or not there's issues when submitting applications that are hybrid to Apple. So Apple is quite notorious for the review process. You can expect a couple days, and somebody on their end is actually going to open your application, follow the instructions that you've given them, and then they're just going to go off and play with your app. So if your app needs an account to sign in, you got to provide an account to that person to play around with your app. And Apple's notorious for rejecting apps that don't perform well. They want the quality of their app store to be quite high. 5 years ago, we had a lot of issues with just poor performing apps getting submitted. We've actually never had an issue around a hybrid app. Apple seems to be totally cool with a hybrid app as long as it performs well. And even if it doesn't adhere to their user guidelines, buttons don't look the same, things like that, they seem to be okay. We've never had issues. At the time, and I think it's still the case, the App Store is actually a hybrid app. And I was in Italy last year, and I ran into an Apple employee who wrote the original App Store, and he was just talking about how PhoneGap used the same thing, and that they were inspired by one of the approaches that we took to apply to their own app stores. So there is definitely some crosstalk there. But again, this PhoneGap Developer App is written with PhoneGap. I had no problem with submission. I've submitted 3 or 4 apps in the past year, and I've had no problem with around UX at least. They'll reject it for functionality issues and sometimes poor performance, but that's not because it's a hybrid app. You could have the same issue with a native app as well. Oh, it would be things like error handling. So if you go offline, for example, they expect that that app is still going to work and it won't crash and it won't hang for a long time. It should immediately tell you that there's no network connection. If you're doing high bandwidth operations, you should check that you're not on the cellular network. You don't want to eat up people's bandwidth. Those are the reasons why that they'll get rid of you for it. Yeah, good question. Yeah. Yeah, in the plugins section here, I talk about the two approaches to adding third-party or official plugins. So we actually have a plugin repository now, plugins.cordova.io, and similar to NPM or Ruby gems, you can search that repository and you can install third-party plugins. Apple's, sorry, I can't. Oh, so you're asking, will Apple reject an application that downloads content from the web, possibly to augment that application? Yeah, it's a tricky and gray space. So our PhoneGap Developer App does that, and we got approved. And we got approved because we emphasize that we're a prototyping tool for developers, a testing tool. Testing seems to be like the key word there. Netflix and a few others have been notorious for doing over-the-air updates with their app. And so you'll launch the app, it'll then just fade away to a spinner, and when it comes back, you've got an update, but you bypass the actual app store. And Apple used to be very strict about that. Today, they're more lenient to a degree. Pretty much they want to ensure that when you do an update, you're still with the app and you're not just completely changing to a completely different product. So they don't want you submitting a developer tool and then after they approve it the next day, you turn it into a torrent site, search engine, or something like that. So they just want to make sure that there's some restriction there. So I think personally it's safe if you update certain components of the app, but the core app can only be updated through the App Store. Yeah, personally, I think that would be fine. Yeah, I think so. Again, one trick that we've actually been doing is specifically with Apple, but this is the case with Android and Windows Phone as well. When you submit an app, you don't actually have to have it go to the published store immediately. You can have it pending your own approval. And so you'll throw together a high quality first iteration. Maybe it would take you a week to make it with dealing with the issue you're talking about, but maybe not the full features of the app. Submit it to the App Store and see if you run into an issue. But make sure you uncheck the box to do an auto-publish. And when the reviewer approves it, it'll actually just sit there pending for publish. And so you don't actually have to put the app in the App Store, but you've at least got like the thumbs up from Apple being like, we're cool with what you're doing. And then you can go off and make your full app, do another submission, and then publish it after that. And that, I can describe it to you after the workshop in a bit more detail. Yeah, just track me down. Yeah, I can even show you it on my computer. We've got a couple examples of it. Cool? Yeah. Include, sorry, a what? Yeah. I think so. You can do anything virtually from the plugin. We even open a separate browser as a plugin, so you can completely hide the current app that we have and show a native pane. And at that point, you can visually do anything you want. You can also use PhoneGap or Cordova as a native library, so just as a web view. So you can create a native project, and just as like one of the sub views, you could include the Cordova web view. And so you can, like I said, there's a spectrum of how you want to use it. PhoneGap leans on the side of a full screen web app, but if you just use the Cordova engine, you can embed it as just like a small percentage of your native app. So usually when you're asking, can I do this, the answer is yes. Again, yeah, if you want to hit me up after this talk. We can look at your problem a little bit more too. All right, let's get into it a little bit here, guys. So the PhoneGap CLI, I've already went over basically what it is. So I have some instructions on installing it. I know it was a prereq for this conference, but just want to make sure that you guys had some steps. So OS X on how to install the CLI, Windows on how to install the CLI, Linux on how to install the PhoneGap CLI. The PhoneGap CLI is actually written with Node.js. We just find, because we're JavaScript developers, Node is a really nice one to work with, so that's where we've chose. Hands up on how many actually have the PhoneGap CLI installed. Sweet, cool. I think we're doing really well then. So we'll just move on. Like I said, the instructions are pretty clear, but it looks like the person next to you has it installed if you don't. So I think you can definitely ask a few questions there. So when it comes to usage, it's actually a very self-documenting API or command line tool. If you run on your command line, I'm going to boost this font for you guys. There we go. Is that better? A little bit better? Yeah. Yeah, I think that's as good as I can get it. If you're running your command line PhoneGap help, or if you run PhoneGap -- help, or if you run PhoneGap -help, you're going to get the same message every time. And this is common command line convention: -- with the words, 1 - with an abbreviation, and some command lines support the word help, so we decide, screw it, we'll just throw all 3 in. You can figure it out. At this point, we just output a ton of usage information. The general flow is PhoneGap with some optional options with an optional command. And if you look at the very bottom of all of our command lists, we actually provide you a few basic command examples. PhoneGap help create, or PhoneGap create path to my app. And likewise, if you want to learn about create, so create is one of the commands listed in that menu, all you have to do is type PhoneGap help create. Or you can type PhoneGap create help. Or you can type PhoneGap create -- help or -help. Basically, put the word help in there with the command, and it's going to try to display a really detailed message on how to use that command. Nice paragraph description, description of the options, and then most important, I think, are actual examples of how to make use of it. So the only catch is that I never wrote the help command to display help for itself. So if you run PhoneGap help, it, oddly enough, doesn't know what that is. But I just noticed that last night when I was trying it out. So yeah, let's start by just creating a project. So the basic workflow, if you were a new user to me, is that you would type PhoneGap help. It's like, I have no freaking clue what I'm doing. Help me, please. And you'll notice that one of the commands is create. And create will describe itself as creating a new project. And you're like, that's really interesting. I don't know how to use that. And so at that point, you can type PhoneGap help create. And it'll then spit out the detailed message on how to create your project. And if you look at it, you'll be like, I get that. I can type PhoneGap space create space the folder name that I want my project to be called. And it'll then generate a brand new project. And so if we actually just jump over to our command line, I'm just going to switch into a directory that's good for me to work in here. This should be okay. Looks big enough. So if we type PhoneGap create my app, at that point it'll describe that it's created a project called my app. Your ID is com.phonegap.helloworld, and when we compile that app, the actual app name is going to be hello world. You can customize the config.xml to change these values if you wish. And this is the full path to where my project is. And so if I go ahead and list out my directory, I can now see that there's a my app folder right there. And if I cd into my app and I list out the contents, it's pretty much identical to that list I showed you before. We have the hooks, platform, plugins, WW, and .cordova folder. So again, if you're running just a little bit behind, you can type the command PhoneGap create my app. Hands up, people generated a project, good idea, sweet, good. So congrats, honestly, you've just created your first PhoneGap app. It's based on the Hello World, it's a very simple app, but it covers all of the basic ideas. As you're using the CLI, you're welcome to submit issues. This is an open source project, and if you contribute code, there's a good chance we'll just add you as a contributor to the project as well. But feel free to submit any issue. And issues can be, they don't have to be negative in any form. Issues can be questions, issues can be feature requests, issues can be opinions on something that could be changed or improved. So yeah, feel free to just blast us with anything. We'll just close it off if we don't think it's relevant. All right, let's go ahead and grab our prototyping tool. That's the next step. So the PhoneGap Developer App is really going to save us in many ways, at least especially in this kind of environment. Like I said previously, you would actually have to figure a way to get this compiled app onto your phone, and that's going to take a while. So the PhoneGap Developer App makes it a lot easier, and it does it with a popular phrase called on-device prototyping. So actually, I'll just cover a few of the limitations. One of the main problems with the PhoneGap Developer App is that it'll only work with the core plugins available to PhoneGap, the official plugins. So if you have a third-party plugin or a custom plugin, that developer app is not going to be able to run that, not today. It's because we have to actually compile that native code for that plugin into the developer app and then submit it to the app stores and wait for it to be approved. And you can see if we keep adding every popular plugin out there, this thing is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and so we have to draw the line somewhere. So we're including really high demand popular plugins, and we're including all the official plugins, but that's where we've stopped. Thankfully, we can get around this with a feature that we're working on, which is to use PhoneGap Build. So if you can configure PhoneGap Build with your signing key, we can actually have the CLI detect that you're adding a new plugin, and we can ask PhoneGap Build to churn out a customized version of the PhoneGap Developer App just for you with the plugins that you want. So we're working on that. You're welcome to do it yourself right now, I guess. You could actually do it, build it with Build, but we haven't automated all of that for everyone. So installing this app is incredibly easy. Just open up or grab your phone or your tablet, whatever you have. Open up your iOS App Store or your Android Play Store or your Windows Phone Windows Store and search for PhoneGap Developer App. It's a free app. Should work on all modern devices. If you've got an older Android, it probably won't run. I think 4.3 or 4.2 might have been. 4.2 is probably our cutoff for it. We also support, funny enough, Windows 8.1 as well. So I think while you guys go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. No, but we actually got a pull request from Mozilla last week. So they've added all of the necessary parts to the CLI already. And there's a blog post of a guy who got the developer app running on a Firefox phone. So he hasn't sent us a pull request for it. But from a technical point of view, they've solved it. So it's pretty cool. It's hard to get your hands on a modern Firefox phone. I don't have one even. I had an old one, but not a new one. So yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah. All right, so I'm just gonna bring up my phone here as well. Well, that's big. Still really big. There we go. So I'll show you at least on the iPhone while we're at it here. while a few of you guys install it. PhoneGap Developer, and there is the app. So I've already went ahead and downloaded it, but yep. Anyone having issues with it? Is the Wi-Fi holding up enough that everyone's able to install it okay? Looks like it. Sweet. Once you've went ahead and downloaded it, you can find it on your actual device and just give it a run. Just open it up. Pretty simple little app. So when it comes to usage of it, what you're going to do is you're going to pair your PhoneGap CLI with your PhoneGap app. And your PhoneGap CLI is going to serve very much like the way a web server would serve content to a browser. It's going to serve the app to your device. And it'll allow you to immediately preview your app, and you can get full functionality off of it. So if you go ahead and open your terminal, navigate into that My App that you went ahead and created. So cd My App or cd path to My App. All you have to do at that point is type the command PhoneGap serve. By default, it's going to start a server on port 3000. So if you have a Rails server, or if 3000 is one of your favorite servers or server ports to use, you can just add a -p and change the port to whatever you want. And once you've got it up and running, you'll just see that there's a small server listening on a certain IP address. If you happen to be using your computer as a hotspot as well, you can use localhost often, or 127.0.0.1 instead of the given IP address. Kind of nice. So I'm just going to kick mine up here for you guys. So this is probably the most awkward part of the developer app, is that you have to type in these numbers without making a mistake on a tiny little keyboard. We're actually going to be changing this soon as well. Soon you'll be able to log in with your PhoneGap Build account, and the server will just do the pairing for you automatically. So log into the CLI, log into your phone. You'll still have the option of just doing the hot pairing without the account, but if you use the account, it'll do the pairing for you, so you don't have to type in tiny numbers all the time. All right, I think I got my IP address correct. So if we jump over to my device, you can see that I've typed in my IP address. Hit connect, successfully connected, and then it'll display the actual app. And so this is the Hello World app running on my phone, but you can at least see it just through the Reflector app. And if we jump back to the terminal, just like a web server, this guy has spit out literally everything that it's served out. We've also, if you're on a Unix-based system, Linux or Mac, or if you've got a more complex environment inside Windows, you'll actually see your console logs from your app appearing in your terminal as well, which can be quite handy. And so at this point, this is like, I know it doesn't really hit home, but this really makes development a hell of a lot easier. At this point, it's very analogous to you opening up a browser on your desktop, pointing it to localhost 3000, and you've got your text editor in one window, you've got your browser in the other window, and when you make changes, you can hit the refresh button, and you can do the exact same workflow with this. So once you've got it up and running, the natural workflow is that you should be able to change files and see those changes. And if you happen to want to switch applications, you should be able to. So if you three-finger tap the screen, you're going to force an update. So essentially, it's a refresh of the browser. And if you four-finger tap, which is less used, you're going to navigate back to your home screen. So the refresh isn't very apparent, but you'll, sorry, 3-finger tap, I guess, navigates back. 4-finger, yeah, refreshes. Got them reversed there, guys. And 4-finger should give it a refresh. You're actually going to find that you'll never use either of those, probably, because Brian LaRue is very adamant that you should never even have to bother with that stuff. If you imagine that you have an iOS phone sitting in front of you, an Android phone sitting in front of you, and a Windows phone sitting in front of you, which happens to me at least quite a bit, you don't want to touch all those screens every time you make a change, so it should just happen for you instead. And Live Reload is a very popular library for web development, and we've added that similar functionality to this app. So if you open up your favorite text editor, you can open up the www directory inside of your app. You can open up the index.html, and if you change any of that content and save it, the app is going to refresh. So a simple one to change is the header one, if that says PhoneGap. Just change it to PhoneGap Workshop or whatever else, and you're going to see the update immediately. I'll maybe use Sublime here for you guys. So if we scroll down to the word PhoneGap, type in PhoneGap Workshop, and if I hit save, the app just refreshes to say PhoneGap Workshop. And this will apply to CSS, this will apply to JavaScript files, index.html, literally anything. Changing an image, it'll refresh. And this improves development massively. To have these phones hanging out in front of you, we actually are using a plugin that prevents the screen from dimming as well. So there's none of that. Just plug them in, sit them in front of you, and open up your text editor and get to work. It's pretty awesome. How's that going for everyone? Can everyone like get that basic flow going, or are you falling behind, hitting some issues? I'm seeing less hands up now than I saw with installing the CLI. Yep, what's up? Bus Air 10? No, I don't know. Like I said, if you see, I think I have a note underneath about, where do I have it here? If you see error on listening to the address in use, that's a very common one. That simply means that you have that port in use. Airbus 10, I would have to Google it. Oh, did you CD into the My App, or are you sitting one directory too far up? Yeah, I'll come take a look. Yeah. Yeah, that's quite okay. You literally don't have any platforms added to this project right now. So we only add platforms when you need them. If you don't want to build for Windows Phone, we don't want to add that kind of burden to you. So that's more of a warning than, it's not an error. So will not connect. Well, potentially the IP address is incorrect, or if you're not on the same network. So if your phone is on your cellular network, but your computer is on this network, you may have issues. So you might want to just, yeah, Holly, would you mind getting them on the Wi-Fi if you could? Okay, guys, so, yeah. Oh, yeah, so that's a beautiful part of this developer app, is that if you have an iPhone and a Windows computer, you can actually start previewing stuff on your iPhone. And if you're using native SDKs, you won't be able to do that. In order to do development on an Apple device, you need an Apple computer. So yeah, if you have an iPhone in front of you, or if a friend does, they can see your app right now. That'll work fine. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Just as a side note, if you're getting a little bit more techie, I actually have a hosted version of the same app up on Heroku. And so I've taken the CLI, published it up onto Heroku, and started the serve command with this app. And so you guys can publicly access the app from phonegap-workshop.herokuapp.com. It'll be slow because it's coming off of Heroku and all of that, but it's a fun little hack that you can do to see how you can actually host an app. So the Hello World app is nice, but it's in the end just a Hello World app. If you go down to the Try Another section, I've taken Holly's more complex app for the conference. You can download it as a zip. You can extract it. You can change into that directory on your terminal and run the PhoneGap serve command. And you can see that exact same app, which is more complex, on your device. And you can imagine that this would be the workflow of your buddy has created a project and you're going to collaborate on it. You can pull that project down and start work. So why don't I give you a show of that. So I've actually got the project downloaded already right here. And likewise, if I run PhoneGap serve, we should see the application update. So now we're actually running the conference app, and I can start to search for people and see the content. And so now suddenly, from just one command, I was able to change applications, and yeah, no compiling required, nothing like that. Like, it's pretty nice to just get off the ground really quickly. So depending on people's issues and how comfortable they are, the general idea is that we're going to take this exact same app, and especially if you're not so cool with the command line, the next step is actually to download the desktop app and do the exact same process. We're going to get this, either your Hello World or the conference demo app served to your phone using the GUI. You guys want to proceed? Do you feel okay with that? Thumbs up, I see. Yep, lots of thumbs ups. Let's go. Awesome, guys. So the desktop app is developed largely by a man named Herm Wong, who again comes from Adobe and is now working at Adobe. It'll be moved to the PhoneGap repo eventually, but you can find it under Herm's repo personally right now. It's open sourced. Again, you feel free to submit issues. I've kind of went over the general idea, so let's just dive into it. If you go down to the usage section, you can just go ahead and download the OS X or the Windows app. If you're running Linux, sadly, we don't support that yet. All of the groundwork has been laid for Linux. It's a matter of Herm having a test environment, so it's not a priority, and he hasn't set one up, so he's not compiling for it. But if you're more tech savvy, I think 5 to 10 minutes, and you could have a Linux build on your system as well. So it's all set for that. Standard install, I describe it, but you would just extract the download because it's a zip file. On OS X, just do the drag and drop trick into your applications folder. On Windows, move that .exe wherever you wish. Doesn't really matter. We don't have a formal installer for Windows yet, just because this is a pre-release. So let's kick it up here. I'll bring it up on mine here. Actually, beforehand, I would recommend that you would kill your PhoneGap CLI server first. They're both using the same code under the hood, so they're going to start the same server up. Sorry? How do I? Oh, it's Control plus C. So the terminal should output that information. It's in the wiki as well. So yeah, it's a pretty common command line key combination. It's like the Control Delete of Windows, except on the terminal you would Command C stuff. Let's get rid of that guy. So we've got ourselves the GUI up and running here. Maybe I'll reposition Windows for you guys. So the GUI has limited functionality compared to the CLI, even though it is using the CLI under the hood. Today, we're only concerned with serving applications and creating applications. You can't do native builds with the GUI yet, but if people are interested in doing that, we're totally down for getting there. Pretty self-explanatory: add a project, remove a project, configuration, which is simply changing your port, and if you want to see server logs that you saw in your window, we can just see them there. And that kind of drills it home that this is actually just a freaking CLI under the hood, which is pretty cool. So again, I've already downloaded the conference app and extracted it onto my computer. If you haven't, you can just go ahead and do that under my plus step here. So when you open the application, you'll just have to go ahead and grab that file. And there's a link here to follow it, but it's simply just a zip file that you can download, extract it, and you're good to go. So after we've went ahead and downloaded the GUI, you can again just add the project. And I'm just trying to emphasize that this is the same workflow as the CLI. You've added this project, which in the CLI world is equivalent to changing into that directory and running the word PhoneGap serve. And at this point, we've got the application up and running, serving, and we can see the port that's on. And again, you should be able to navigate around and play around with it. Oh. So yeah, it's extremely simple, but again, if you're not interested in the CLI, I think this is a pretty good alternative to it. I feel like there's a good chance you're going to run into a bug if you're using the GUI. It is a young project, and so although I've documented all the steps to get this up and running, if you happen to have an issue, I would recommend that you just go to Herm's issue tracker, drop him a friendly reminder on what the problem is, and he'll get around to fixing it, because yeah, your feedback honestly is the most important feedback we could ever have. So we appreciate it whenever you drop us a line. So what you want to take away from this is just that the PhoneGap CLI and the PhoneGap GUI have the exact same workflow with the PhoneGap Developer App. You can use the exact same project with either. It's fully compatible. And you can, in the end, just simply start editing code and seeing those changes on your phone, which is, again, really nice. Make sense to everyone? Is everyone kind of falling behind on that part? Sorry? The Wi-Fi is grinding. That's too bad, guys. I was worried about that. If you need the sample app and you don't happen to have it, I can just stick it onto a USB key for you. So, yeah. Sorry? SneakerNet? Yeah, that'll work too. Yeah. Yeah, if you guys need any files, just stick up your hand. I'll throw them onto it. Okay. Want the both apps and sample app? Cool. I'll do that. The only other real section that I think is honestly important for this workshop is PhoneGap Build. But if the Wi-Fi is grinding, what's the point in doing PhoneGap Build? It's entirely web service-based samples. So I think let's focus on the desktop app. You guys can always look at PhoneGap Build afterwards. I've fully documented every step. And again, if you're feeling bored here, feel free to check out the plugins or hooks part. Show me what you make. It'd be cool. Oh, I see the GUI is sitting at, yeah, 40 megabytes, so that's probably why it's nice and slow for you guys.
Question?
Yep.
Use the question mark for the help function. Once we get installed, the help question mark
Oh yeah, you're welcome to click on that if you want. Again, it just describes roughly how to use the application. Since it's such a young project, I think report issue will go to GitHub. I'm not sure. Oh, tutorials go to the wiki, so it's not too bad, I guess. It's a good start. So you're welcome to figure that stuff out. I think Herm will be growing that up as the project grows as well. Yeah. Yeah.
So without the developer app on your device, can you use the CLI to build an iOS build from the Mac from a Windows computer?
Yes, actually another fellow asked that as well. So it's a nice advantage of the developer app is that you can oh, no. So the landscape is if you want to build for the iPhone, someone showing something? Yeah, that's true. So let's start, I guess, from the beginning. The landscape is that if you're building for an iPhone, you need an Apple computer. If you're building for a Windows phone, you need a Microsoft or a Windows computer. If you're building for Android, you can use Mac, Windows, or Linux. So VM is one option. If your Windows computer, though, running a VM of Mac usually doesn't work. So the alternative is a cloud compiler. And that's really where PhoneGap Build can help out a lot, is that for free, you can just upload your assets and it'll churn out those binaries for you.
I've been using PhoneGap Build. It's great.
Yeah.
I've only touched the CLI yesterday and today.
Cool. Yeah, you're outgrowing Build.
There's no reason for me to go to the CLI if I can't build iOS from my PC.
Yeah. So if you have a Mac, it's a lot easier to build a Windows one. Yeah, I can run a Windows VM, but if you're on a Windows computer, unless you can get a VM of Apple up and running, it seems like Build is one of your best choices today. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Yeah. Oh, yeah. From your developer app, you can't. Well, you could actually do that. You can't do that today. No, it's a use case that we're actually looking for more people to voice about. So if people want that, we could consider it. But today, you actually have to be running a server that understands what the developer app needs. It would be nice though if you could just publicly host those assets somewhere. Dropbox is a fantastic one, and Google Drive can do the same thing. You could do that if you compile an empty PhoneGap app and put it onto your phone, and then instead of pointing to the index.html in the config.xml file, you could set the path to be your Dropbox location. And at that point, every time you start the app up, it'll actually just retrieve the index.html from Dropbox rather than the local file system. That's basically the trick that inspired the PhoneGap Developer App. We used to do that for clients, especially on the BlackBerry. It would take like 5 minutes to compile a BlackBerry app sometimes. So that's what we would get around doing. But the developer app doesn't do that out of the box, but it totally could if we have enough people doing thumbs up on that kind of feature request. Otherwise, you just have to be a little savvy to do it yourself. That's what people would do, yeah. A totally legit way of doing development, yeah. Like thumbs up to you for figuring that out. It's not. Yeah, it's just if you want to access the bridge and the native parts of a PhoneGap app, you'll have to compile it, yeah. We have another project on the go called Cordova for the browser, which actually stubs out a lot of the native functions. And if that lands, then you could do exactly what you're talking about with Safari or Chrome on your phone. That'd be super awesome. All right, guys, looks like the download's done here. So we're starting to get a little low on time. It would be a good time to figure out how many people are interested in the enterprise app, getting to know kind of the lay of the landscape. We've got one hand back there, 2, 3, quite a few. Anthony, how do you feel about doing a demo now, or would you rather hold off and do it at the end of the day? Sorry to put you on the spot. Cool. Yeah, so why don't, while the download happens, and I'll get the download onto this USB stick for you guys, Anthony can at least give you an idea of what PhoneGap Enterprise is about. That'd be great.
All right, so I'm not going to spend too much time now. After Holly and Christoph do their advanced part, I'm going to come back at the end of the day and show some a bit more interesting things with PhoneGap Enterprise. So yeah, my name's Anthony. I work for Adobe. I'm part of sort of the enterprise side, working for our product called Experience Manager out of the Ottawa office. So we're down here this week just sort of talk a little bit about what we're doing on the server side, as well as how we're integrating with the PhoneGap guys as well. So I think for now I'll just stick with some beginner stuff, and then I'll say I can come back and do some advanced stuff. So yeah, PhoneGap Enterprise. Why have we stuck the word enterprise after PhoneGap? What does that really mean? And really it is all about taking the open source mobile development framework that PhoneGap and Cordova have done, and introducing the concept of managed content to that. So when you're building any kind of PhoneGap app, it's all about content. You've got your HTML content and all your other web content. And there's no reason why you can't actually bring in the concept of managing that content in a better way that makes sense for a larger organization. And there's a few ways that can happen. I've got fancy logos here. One, Adobe has something called the Marketing Cloud, which is something they're building up, sort of it's analogous to their Creative Cloud they already have as well. And that's a place where you can manage all your assets for your organization. Generally, it's with a marketing slant, so you can manage your analytics and all your other more, Mike? Maybe? I'll just bend over, how about that? So yeah, I'm going to show that a little bit, but the sort of the marketing cloud concept and how PhoneGap fits into that. And then later today, I'm going to talk more about Experience Manager, which is the product we work on, which is actually what Marketing Cloud is backed on. Experience Manager is Adobe's content management solution that has been around for a while, and it's mainly been used so far for digital asset management and web content management. So a lot of websites and stuff are built using this as their back end. So yeah, I'm just gonna we'll look at here. So can I make that bigger? So I should go back home here. Okay, so this is Adobe's Marketing Cloud. This is their cloud offering for managing your digital assets. And one thing we're sort of working on with this concept is there's no reason why you can't take a PhoneGap app, because it's just content, and stick it up the Marketing Cloud. And it gives us a few advantages. This is still pretty early concepts to figure out where we can take this, but the idea is once it's up being managed, I can show you, similar to the PhoneGap Developer App, we have a PhoneGap Enterprise App, which is sort of backing a lot of this. And it's a way, basically when you're developing an app, it's got to go through some sort of stages usually between development and staging, and actually when you actually deliver it to an app store. And some of these concepts can help with that. So if we go into assets from organization, I created a little PG folder here for PhoneGap Enterprise. And there I created a workshop folder. And I uploaded an app here. So this is I just did a PhoneGap create hello world. And that's all we see there. And back here, I got the app running here. I'll log out for a sec. So this is the PhoneGap Enterprise app. And I'm going to log into the Marketing Cloud. I'm going to have one organization, our sample org. What we'll see here, If it worked. See, when you work with alpha software, things don't really work. That's fine. Do it again. Hopefully we see my app there. Plus there's a few others. So there's that Hello World app under my workshop. So similar to the developer app, you can now actually download this app onto our device. And there you go. It doesn't really do much because that's all the app is, but let's try another one. I can't do 3-finger tap on there either. So I have a GitHub project I've been playing with to sort of highlight a lot of the PhoneGap stuff. So similar to what Michael just showed, I'm going to use the app Holly and Christoph are going to be developing later. And I'm going to see if I can actually stick that up in the working cloud so we can view it in our developer app or enterprise app. So if I go back here, and I guess I'll go up a folder. I'm going to create a new folder. What is it called? Whatever, just not create a folder for it. So all I've done, if we go to my file system, I've taken, I can show you. So where's all my source? So I have basically created a PhoneGap project here. And all I've done is zip it up into a zip file. And there it is right there. So we're going to upload that. We'll churn away for a bit. We should hopefully see an icon when it's done. There we go. So now I've just added yet another app to our enterprise app. So back to the simulator. And there you go. So now it shows up. We can open that. Again, this is one other thing to know about this. So there you go. That's the basic app. Hopefully I can actually look for stuff. There we go. So that's the app running now. So that's, you're thinking, okay, that's very similar to the developer app. And there's a few differences that make it hopefully more useful for an enterprise. One of them, the fact is, there's once you have the app on the the app is downloaded, it's not streamed. So the enterprise app, when you're thinking enterprises, generally these are higher level executives or type of decision makers maybe that need to be involved in the decision making process for whatever apps you're creating. The enterprise app gives them a way to log into their managed server and actually download these apps on their devices, and then they can actually use them and play with them offline if they want. So it's one option. And it's also just that it's being backed by a managed server. So it's not being or with managed content. It's not being backed just by a developer setting up a node server to stream stuff to their device. So there's sort of very different audiences, you know, between the developer and who would use the enterprise apps, which is why there are two, and hopefully they're going to meet different needs. So one other thing I'll show you. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. If I do this one more time. So once we upload it, one other option is the this is sort of pretty basic what's in the Marketing Cloud. Later on today I'll show you some more advanced things that you can do. But there is some basic concept of staging here. So the fact that when your app is in development, obviously goes through many development iterations. You can keep updating the app on your server as it reaches development milestones. But eventually, you probably say, okay, we like the state of this app. We can sort of go through a concept of promoting and putting it into a staging. And at that point, you're probably getting close to an App Store submission. And that basically, the idea is that once you've staged the app, development can still continue now in your development branch for future versions, and you can sort of see both of those in your enterprise app. So now if we go back to our enterprise app and log in, if I gave it enough time to copy. Yeah, so now we see that app I just staged. It's the only app now that's staged. And I could actually, in theory, open that. And then you can also still see it there. And if I got really adventurous, I could try to actually change a file here. Not sure what the... I'm going to try it, why not? So if I go back to my source, and I could open up this index file, something simple. And you know what, maybe we're getting ready for next year's conference. I'm just going to change the date there. I can go find that file. Where are we? Basic. I'll replace it. So now, if we go back to our app, if I didn't miss a step, and now I'm going to go get that development conference. Now, hopefully, we're going to see that the title is changed to 2015 if I didn't forget a step. Apparently, I forgot a step. Unless I'm in the right place. Well. Yeah, I can't even hit there. Did I save it? Anyway, that was the idea. Now I have to figure out what I was doing there. But anyway, I think that's about it. Yeah, so I think I'm going to save most of this stuff for after Holly's talk to make more sense, but we're going to go into basically the advantages or some benefits you can get from actually using a managed server. But that was just sort of just scratching the surface between the enterprise app that's coming out and then and basically just how you can sort of get started with the enterprise space. And that's about it. So Michael's still here, or Michael's at the back? Michael, he's talking. I think 15 minutes to lunch. So if you have questions now, you can ask them, but you can also, I'm around all day. Things might make more sense later if you're more interested in what the enterprise offering is. And that's it, I think. Thank you.